Hello. 2 seconds.
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Just got to change my headphones. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Doing well. Thank you very much. Good to see your face again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How's things?
Things are good. Things are good. Can't complain on my end. How about you?
No complaints. We're all well. Let's get this bad boy started.
Okay.
This dude, simple, super casual conversation. Quick intro to you. Then I'm going to chat to you about some of your threads.
Okay.
Take questions. That's it. Nice and easy. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, so we have people. So how you doing, sir?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing well. Doing very well indeed. So what we usually do is just give it like a few minutes for people to roll on in. And then we can do a bit of an intro, take some questions, chat about the grand success of trends.vc, which has been going well over the last few months, I see.
Yeah, things are going great.
Is it how you thought it would go when you started it right now?
It's coming pretty fast, but vision-wise, I would say yes.
Nice. Love to hear it. Okay, so you got some names in here. Okay, hey Brian, hey Colleen, Danny, Kimona, Neil, Ramses, Scott, Tapan. Good to see you all. Good to see some regular names. Hope everyone's doing well. If you have anything to ask, make sure, as usual, pop it in the chat. If you've been here before, you probably know the score. And yeah, let us know where you are attending from as well. That's always good to know. Hey, Ramses. Make sure you toggle the message, the blue little tab to all panelists and attendees as well. Scott, San Diego. You've been here before, Scott. We know that. They're from USA. Hey, Colleen. Colleen, I wonder if you're keeping a tally on how many Makerbot sessions you've attended. You must be. I think you must be leading. Dubai, nice. Argentina, awesome. Milwaukee, hey, Brian. Cool. And who here knows Dru from Twitter, from Trends? And Dru, what's been going on with you recently while everyone asks away? When did you start Trends?
I hit publish February 10th of this year on the first report.
Yep.
And probably committed to it like the Friday before that in a mastermind meeting that we were located like a block away from where I'm at right now.
Nice. What was the mastermind?
0 to 1 Makers. You'll sometimes see me retweet messages from that account. Yeah.
Nice. So what was that? It was just like a final push that you needed to go all in on it, sort of thing?
Yeah, I had the idea for a few months, and we were done giving our updates, just round robin style. What went well last week? What do you plan to do next week? Where do you need help? And so we were just kicking the shit, and people were throwing out ideas. And a few people threw out some ideas, and I was like, "What the hell?" Throw out this thing that I've been holding on to for a couple of months. They loved it, and when it came out, I realized that no one really understood what I was going for in terms of like deep framework-based research, and then it just seemed to like exceed their expectations based on what they expected the report to look like. Were the earliest supporters and still the biggest and loudest, I'll say, supporters of Trends VC.
Amazing. So we actually have some Trends folk in here. Colleen, Trends subscriber, and Ramsey's from Trends. Nice,
Amazing.
good to see. So if you've got any questions throughout this workshop, just go and fire away either in like the Q&A tab or maybe potentially in the chat tab if you want to do that as well. That's absolutely fine. So in a sec, we're just going to get a quick intro from Dru, just in case he's seeing his face for the first time and hearing what he's got to say for the first time. But before that, we're going to be running this as this is like a challenge workshop. So the Makerbot T30 challenge is a challenge where everyone's going to be building their products over the course of 30 days. And we do these workshops as a way for people to kind of gain some insights into different industries and maybe learn some stuff about how they can apply these lessons or the knowledge from people like Dru into their own products. Because I know this conversation is going to be really useful because Dru's covered like a wide range of verticals, which is like unique. It's like a unique perspective. People that actually go pick a vertical, do a load of research, and then publish a piece of work. And people, if it's useful, can always refer back to that. So saying that, Dru, do you want to give a more concise intro to yourself and Trends at VC?
Yeah, so intro to myself. I'm a developer by trade. Did that up until 2017. Took a mini retirement. I was living in Atlanta, but I traveled, picked up jujitsu, did improv for a little bit. And financial runway started to run low towards like the end of 2019. And started to get serious about building things again. So if you go to my personal website, you'll just see projects and projects. Probably like the last 5 or 6 of those came like towards the end of 2019 up until I started Trends, which right now I would describe as like a series of weekly reports. We've been experimenting with a community, something called Trends Tribe. The idea there is that we're trying to turn community on its head. Instead of throwing everyone in a Slack or a circle group, we're going for building like one-on-one bonds first, and then maybe use like Slack or something as a backbone so that people have some type of context for connection and more willing to help each other out. That's the long and short of it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And you touched on something there, actually one of the trends that I've picked out that I want to talk about, which is the community side, because this is, you've got a couple which relate themselves in some way to the community side. And another one is like audience first products and also $1 million one person businesses. So the 4 that we're going to talk about today are paid communities. One of your early ones. This is Trends number 14 for those looking. Audience first products, digital products, because this is something which is still fairly hot at the moment, especially with the rise of Gumroad and services like that. And then $1 million one person businesses. So I haven't actually prepped Dru for the ones I want to talk about, just so I could get his fresh take. So yeah, any questions around those 4 topics, line them up and get them in the chat. So before we carry on, let us know what sort of vertical you're working on your Makerpad projects or like in general, and then we can maybe answer some specific questions around that. So if you've got them, just bring them in the Q&A and then we can pick them up when suitable. So the first one I wanted to get into, Dru, and it's like a fairly early one, is paid communities. And maybe this is a good place to start because you're kind of thinking about it at Trends at the moment. So what's your overall one-liner about, or a couple of sentences about paid communities?
Yeah, just think of a paid community, the paid part specifically, as a filter or barrier to entry. And to go like a little deeper or to make a lateral jump, like payment doesn't have to be in terms of money, right? It could be some type of like hurdle or cost of entry that's effort, or, I think about everything marketplaces where it's a paid community, but you also have to run a marketplace above a certain threshold. And I think like those types of combinations, or sometimes you drop the paid part and the paid comes in terms of energy or effort or time, and you somehow qualified yourself to come into this community, and they just tend to be less noisy that way.
Got it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just share my screen, and then we can actually just see the trends tab. Bear with me. If you can see this one, if I move these out of the way. Can one see this? Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. Cool. So problem, free communities tend to be noisy without a barrier to entry. Solution, paid communities have requirements, financial or otherwise. And you go through to like list some players. Which are the ones, apart from Makerbot, obviously that kind of standing out to you here at the moment, and what tools do you think are like the most effective way of actually influencing and building a paid community?
The one that would jump out to me, it isn't even there, and it probably isn't in the paid version either, but one I've been obsessed with is Writing Compound. It's probably the best managed community that I belong to or I've ever seen before. I think what makes it special is that it's a big community or a growing community that feels small. It's heavily curated. You can tell they put a lot of thought into documentation of processes, expectations. They layer rituals on top of like Slack being a thing. They also have like multiple rituals. And it just gives you another layer. So you get to know people and you're not just like in this big noisy group. You have these like one-on-one bonds or these, you know, these deeper connections with people.
And what do you think paid communities are specifically more like engaging or interesting to people? Because I know that from my point of view, the money is like a psychological trigger, which kind of works sometimes. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it, right? Like you invest, now you're more committed. Like we usually talk about sunk costs in terms of a bad thing, but maybe it's something that you want to do, and now you're tricking yourself to react to the sunk cost effect. But it's also a filter for if you didn't have that money barrier or time barrier, or there's some type of like qualification that you have to meet. It just gets noisier, and then the people that tend to be more high signal are less willing to participate in the community. So it just creates this like negative compounding, if you will, without some sort of filter. And again, I don't think that it has to be paid. It can. That's probably the most straightforward route to get there, but there are a lot of other creative ways to cancel out that noise.
And platforms.
Mm-hmm.
These are kind of jousting for position at the moment. One when we use at Makerbot is Circle, and I know we actually moved off of Slack to go to Circle. This is kind of comparing like the async versus sync way of working.
Mm-hmm.
What were the trend you saw there among the networks?
You just said it. They're jousting. Yeah, it's like, you know, people are like copying each other. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably signal that this feature, this form factor is needed. I think about like Hop into Icebreaker. I just saw Snack. But they're all like sort of orienting around this like random one-on-one like professional chat roulette feature. I'm probably not supposed to ask you questions, but I wanted to know like what drove the decision from Slack to Circle for you guys.
So a lot of it was that when you're working in Slack and when somebody asks a question, if the day is like particularly busy, that question can like disappear pretty quickly. And then actually referring back to something is trickier. So conversations get lost, especially if someone's like wanting an answer to something. If that answer is not answered immediately, that can kind of get lost off the page and then it's gone forever. Whereas in something like Circle, you have these threads and it's more like a cross between forum style, so it's still there and you can make sure that people get the answers to the questions they need. And often when you're cross time zones, sometimes async working can work nicer. So yeah, just it's personal preference. I know a lot of communities still reside in Slack, so
yeah, I can like use this, I guess, as a learning opportunity if anyone's thinking about building a paid community. One thing that I saw was that like you have Slack where you get this pooling effect. Facebook has a similar dynamic of people are already there for other purposes. So you sort of get the runoff effect. What I see with Circle, Mighty Networks, and those is that it's more isolated. So it seems like you have to bring more value to the table to justify, you know, people coming to this isolated experience. So I guess just one more question. Did you notice any type of drop off in behavior from Slack to now we're in Circle? Now there are like, you know, is there less participation? Did you notice any change?
I think it's just different participation. I think when we actually put the question out to the community, it was like 50-50, the 50 like Slack and 50% like Circle. So yeah, that
Okay.
was, it's one of those. So we still use both. So we still have our Slack community. So what do you think are the big opportunities, say if you're building a product? Can you just build like a paid community as like a standalone product, do you think?
I'm seeing that happen right now. So Launch MBA by Kieran. I think
Mm-hmm.
he started that way. He had sort of a small audience, but he just launched more around this idea or this need that he saw for like accountability among founders.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay. So leads on to the next one. Do you think if you were launching like a project brand new and you had maybe like a community aspect in mind, how would you go? What would you see like the requirement to build first? Would you need to build an audience first? Could you build like a community around a product? What's the like different versions of communities and audience first products that you've seen?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to Karen, but before I go there, what I would do, and I think is probably like the path of least resistance, is starting with like content or some sort of media, and then you draw people in. They already have a basis for connection. They're interested in at least this one thing. They probably share more things in common. Then on top of that, I would build a community. A great post that I'll link to a lot in different reports is on linear commerce by Webb Smith, and he talks about other people have said it right, but it's just like, every company is becoming a media company, but then he has this diagram where he breaks it in terms of like, you can rely all on paid acquisition, or you can take the media route first, and the media route is slower, but now it's more defensible as well. And it just gives you so much optionality. I've seen cases where they plan to roll out products, and then the content was just going to be the magnet for them, but they just stopped and they said, I'm going to monetize the content, but you don't have to do that. And they can decide to always like bolt these other products or whatever on, because again, you have that organic reach, that organic acquisition. Bringing it back to Karen though, I think of what he did there with like Launch MBA as serving sort of, you have like those people, they'll go to like a new city like SF or something, and they may not be an expert in the field, but they understand that like there needs to be some sort of organizing body and they want to be involved. So now they become this social lightning rod by putting themselves in the mix. That's like a physical example, but this is just an example like on the internet of him doing that, of like people have this need for accountability and I'm just going to be that organizing force. And that's what gave him his wedge like into a paid community.
And we actually have a question from Ali. It's about like marketplaces. We can kind of hop into that as like a bit of a segue. What do you think about creating a marketplace for ideas? For example, a place where a single mom can find a cool idea and use the platform resources to kickstart that project.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of these. The only one that comes to mind specifically is one called Painland. And I don't even understand it. I don't know the domain specifically, but maybe if you Google Painland, I think the guy, his first name may have been Mateo. But yeah, a few people have like taken shots at this. And I've also seen maybe like a sister company to Makerbot, but it's not MemberStack. It is MemberSpace. I think the
Yep.
way Makerspace started was going through forums and like looking for pains. So if you think about like, you just escape the form factor and you think about like, I have a problem, how can I solve it? Or finding like these ideas, you can also comb forums.
How do you find your trends? Like, let's say there's a lot of people actually in here now, which are maybe like set on an idea and have been working on it for like a couple of weeks, but there'll be people who are always kind of looking out for either like an opportunity, like a problem to solve. How do you go about it? How do you work through that process in your head?
Yeah, so when the first report went out, like I had a list of probably 30 things that I could have written about. And each time like I do research or have a conversation, like that list just gets longer and longer and longer. So there isn't like a scientific process of like I push a button and then it's going to spit a trend out to me. It's more of an art than a science, but they just come from this long like Evernote document that I have of ideas, and then I constantly resort that based on like what I think Trends Pro members need. Or I've been doing like Trends talk sessions, which are like strategy calls, and the last two topics have been like heavily influenced by different people that I've done those calls with.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I just found that Painland. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Helping founders having problems worth solving. Nice. And Scott said, in addition to identifying the trends, is there a framework that you go through to research them?
I don't know if I would call it a framework. It's more of like a process, and we can jump into that. It's evolved a lot. So I'll tell you like what it is in its current state. And currently, like, it involves a lot more conversations. I find that, like, people are just, if they're really passionate about an area, whether they're an expert or just interested, they want to talk. And it's for the same reason that I'm now going to jump to like what the process was before, of like podcasts, videos, articles, sometimes books. The type of research that seems to be the most useful in terms of like an 80-10 or like, I'm sorry, 80-20 or a 90-10 split, is focusing on interviews, because you get this divergent conversation. If something doesn't make sense, the interviewer is going to dig deeper, versus like a one-to-many medium where something may not be clicking or resonating, but it's hard for you to be in your audience head the way that an interviewer can. So the process right now looks like, 20 to 30 hours of just deep research, followed up by conversation. May talk to 3 people. This last week for the report that just went out, I think talked to like 10 or 11 people, like an hour plus each, sometimes over a course of days, followed up by more research. And then like just a crazy amount of like revising, editing, simplifying concepts before it goes out.
So in essence, your product is probably an audience first product. Would you say? Did you built an audience before you did it? But you kind of, if I remember, you almost like built it in public just by communicating trends you were seeing through Twitter or just online.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that's beautiful about like the media approach that I talked about, like using that as the wedge into community, because it's both, right? Like you can use it as a product, but it's also audience building. Whereas you think about like if you build a product like some type of SaaS tool, automatically like everyone isn't going to need that product. There's also an education piece. There's competition, as opposed to if you're doing some type of content from like a certain POV or perspective or point of view, and you're not selling news, right? Like it's insight, or it's like something about you is you're selling your individuality in a way. You don't have competition. And it's, again, just back to defensibility.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. This is kind of what we talked about in workshops last week, was actually finding a problem that is kind of in your interest wheel anyway, and the one that scratches your own itch. Because if you don't play that game, then you'll lose out to somebody who does. So let's say somebody who isn't naturally as curious as you about like trends and everything that's going on, like in tech, in audience first products and digital products, they're just going to lose out to you because, one, you probably like outwork them just from being interested. So let's say somebody's clocking off and just like going through the motions. Somebody who's deeply passionate about it will always win. I see that quite a lot. So what have you seen any trends? A bit of like a side question. Have you seen any trends which are really like trendy, but you're just like, I'm just not going to cover that?
I tend not to like to do these because I don't know. The first one I did was subscription D2C, which you see a lot of people in the space. But when I think about like a beautiful business, I think about beautiful economics. And I was like, maybe there's something that I don't see. So that's one where I held off for a very long time. I knew that it was a gap in terms of like, if you think about the reports as a portfolio, I knew it was a gap. But like you said, I stayed away from it because it's just like, they're just not beautiful businesses to me. And then I had conversations with like some of the people, and it's interesting because that's the first thing they conceded was like, like Drew, like if you think about like, oh, like a beautiful business is an insurance company or something like that in terms of economics. I think that like we didn't get into it for that, right? Like if we thought about it like that, maybe we'll be in some other industry. So went after that. The next topic is actually another one, which is going to be micro SaaS, which I'm short micro SaaS, but it'll be interesting to explain why I'm short micro SaaS and also have conversations with people that are long micro SaaS, just to go deep there. And I think that I talked about like the interview, the divergent conversation. I think that's going to be really interesting this week, to have people, defend that position, or maybe they just say like, we know, it's a crappy business, but we like doing it, sort of like the D2C people said. But yeah.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that I didn't really get the impression that you do a trend that you kind of weren't interested in or that you were short on, for instance. I thought that because the one part that I love about your trends, you've got like a haters section, which is great because most of the time people just cover like why this thing is so amazing
Yeah.
or why they hate it. Rarely do you have like, here's like loads of good things about it. Here's some really interesting things. And then here's the contrasting opinion. I think that's a really good thing to cover.
One thing I do like that even happened in the subscription D2C report, and it's also going to happen in micro SaaS, is even though like I'm short the trend, that means that it's trending, that popular, like most people are like, oh, like, you know, this is a great opportunity. I'm like, no, like there are things that you don't see. I'm still going to try to find opportunities to like play within that, which I think is the like fun part, to just try to get some type of enjoyment
Yeah, right.
out of it. Yeah.
Can you define micro SaaS for us?
I think about micro SaaS from two angles. One big component of it is that it can be built on type of like Chrome or Shopify or something. There's some type of like underlying API or platform that you're built on top of. Another way you can think about it is it's just solving like a small problem where you don't need, you know, hundreds or thousands of employees like a MailChimp or, you know, another company, but it's solving like a small valuable problem is the way I think of it. So
Okay.
you can find examples like, for example, Banner Bear, right? Banner Bear has a specific job,
Yes,
nor
love
does
Banner
it
Bear.
depend on like Shopify or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. But you can also find products like ILO from Dan Roden that, you know, he's building a micro SaaS on top of Twitter. So I haven't like honed down the definition, but that's how I think about it.
Got it. So it's not necessarily just a tool that sits on top of another platform. It can be something that's kind of agnostic, but is it kind of going the same sort of way as the like $1 million one person business sort of route, maybe?
I
Like
think of
not
those like,
necessarily one person, but small teams.
I think about, I guess the first thing to mind that really jumped out to me when you compared those two is that you look at those $1 million one person businesses, and for the most part, they have defensibility. It reminds me of a personal essay that I wrote called, what was it, $1 million no code businesses. And what you realize, that's on my personal site, what you realize is that all of these businesses are built on brand because the code has been commoditized. So this is where they find it, and it's defensible. But when I think about micro SaaS, most of these things aren't defensible, and that's a big reason why I'm shorted. So I think there's some type of misalignment between like the $1 million one person business and also like the micro SaaS. But I think that, like, for better or worse, I'm going to learn something this week. I have a conversation lined up with Tyler. I know he was writing the book on
Yeah.
micro SaaS, so I can't wait for that conversation.
Yeah, I saw his tweet. That's interesting.
Oh, I didn't
Just
even see the tweet, but okay.
just the eyes. No, it was just eyes. It was just the
Oh,
eyes are
so
enough.
I
That
shouldn't
was
even
it.
said anything. We had that lined up for a while. I didn't see that.
That's okay. Nice. That's really interesting. Is there anybody here that's actually building a product or service that is going to be like a SaaS or could be a micro SaaS business? Let us know. We could take a look. There's one that I wanted to mention. That's one we've just started using, which is grain.co. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a tool that sits on top of Zoom. It's basically like a cross between so auto recording software plus Descript plus like live note taking and flagging and highlights and clips. So it's really useful for, say, speaking to you on Zoom. It auto records the conversation, and then you can kind of like highlight clips out of it, take notes. You can collaboratively take notes across your Zoom account. But yeah, at the moment, in its present form, sits entirely on top of Zoom. Whether it will or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, they're like a smallish team, but growing, and yeah, it's a good product.
Yeah, you just made me think about another element. This is what I get from like these, I call them report reviews that I do with people like leading up to the report drop. But now I'm wondering, like, what about a bigger business that's built on top of another platform like Grain, where you're talking about like transcription, all of these other services, and they're sort of getting away from like the micro component. My gut tells me like that's the worst of both worlds, not for the consumer, but for the business in terms of platform risk. Because now you've invested so much, but you still have this dependency on another platform.
Hmm. Yeah, would you say that becomes okay at a certain point, or would you say, rephrase it, would you say that's okay if the tool that you're relying on is at a certain point?
Again, I don't think that it's bad for the consumer. I just think it's bad for whoever the stakeholders are in the business, because one scenario is that Zoom decides to, roll that functionality out in the next feature release, and now it's redundant. The consumer, it's probably better integrated, right? And there's like less friction for them. But again, the stakeholders in the business, now they have a problem. Like, I'm short for so many reasons. It's just whatever angle you want. Yeah.
So do you think it's like either acquisition or die type model for these sort of businesses, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, you see
Eventually?
things like TweetDeck, right? Where I think TweetDeck at one point was an independent company. Twitter bought them, but that's a long shot because I'm getting like sort of like kind of a conspiracy theorist here. But what about like if, there's an investor with relationships between like one of your competitors, you're both built on top of this platform, but like maybe TweetDeck wasn't the best tool, but the TweetDeck competitor or, TweetDeck wasn't the best tool. One of their investors also has connections within Twitter. They align that, and that's the other thing about micro SaaS, right? Like if it's a lower barrier to entry, it's an easier, or a simple type of problem. If it's easy for you, it's easy for other people to enter the industry as well. I think that for the consumers, it's great. They have so many options, but for the people deciding to go after these opportunities or invest in these opportunities.
Got it. Yeah, Neil's just linked another one.
No.
No, it's really interesting. And Neil's just linked another one, contactbook.app. It's like a G Suite marketplace app. So yeah, it is interesting because there's so many businesses built on top of G Suite or like Google Suite. There's like Chrome extensions are really interesting businesses from learned a lot about that on My First Million podcast about the metrics around installs, and no one ever uninstalls a Chrome extension. Maybe that's like a topic for another day.
I'm giving the whole report here, and I haven't even written it yet, but I'm giving the whole report of where you talked about like G Suite, right? What some of these platforms can do is like kind of use like their ecosystem, these developers that are going to build on top of them to like find the most valuable problems that they need to solve. They can almost like use that to drive their product roadmap. A lateral jump I'm about to make is if you think of Amazon, and they have all of these private label brands, but they also have all the sales data and more sales data than like the FBA sellers and people that sell on top of Amazon. And they can use that data to drive out like whatever private label brand they're going to roll out next in terms of ROI. And, these software platforms, different vertical, but are sort of doing the same thing. That's what I'm going to ingest next because that's the most valuable problem. Not stated, not that people said, but as expressed by behavior, right? Like, what are they spending on these tools? I probably have all that information if I'm Shopify or Google or whatever.
Everyone, wherever you're working on, let us know what like category of businesses in. Are you building like a marketplace? Are you building a community? Are you building a service or like a digital product that you're trying to package up and sell? Maybe it's like a course. Let us know. We can kind of dive into a unique one. Drew, what's your favorite trend at the moment? Which there must be I'm thinking, with the paid community side, with the small business side, people leveraging like no-code tools. What's your favorite combination of these new businesses popping up in the moment?
I haven't thought about a combination, but in terms of, I like the way you asked the question. In terms of like a single trend or something that I wrote about is probably no code, because what a lot of people don't see is that like it's less about trends, like, right? I can make anything trendy. I can make predictions within any vertical. But what's really happening is there's a lattice work forming where every report that's rolled out is going to connect to like more topics than the previous one did. And what I'm seeing is that no code connects to everything else. That's probably, if you think about it, like a tree that has the most outlinks. Yeah.
So I think the tools kind of enable this as well. So they enable like the paid community, like the subscriptions, the like gated content, like the premium newsletters, like Substack, the personal brands. Like you said, there's so many different threads in there. It's really interesting. Jacob said, Shopify is famous for implementing the best performing Shopify apps / integrations into their app on their own.
I didn't even know that. If you're open to talking after this, I'm not sure who said that, but would love to have a call and learn more about that, Jacob. I think I know Jacob from Indie Hackers, maybe, but okay.
Familiar name.
It was the last name that made me say that, but yeah.
There you go. It's nice to see some like common names popping up. How do you see this may be covered in your one person businesses. But how do you see like automation playing a role in this? Because I know like you must be seeing it in like small teams, or you might be using it like yourself. I don't know, like with tools like Zapier. How are you seeing this becoming like a crucial part of businesses and business models coming out?
Yeah, I guess let me know if I answer the question by doing this, but I want to like open it up a little bit. I'm going to revisit no code as like a report soon. I did this with Bootstrap funds. I think that was the only time I did it before. But going to revisit no code soon. And there's something where you see that like marketers were like the OG no coders before like no code was like a trendy term. They were building these sequences out with if else statements and all of these other things. And you're just seeing that spread to like, other roles like project managers, everything where they're no longer dependent on like developers. And that's not this. It's not going to stop the process. The fact that they don't have access to like a developer's time, and that's what I'm seeing. The natural like next question or next statement is just that gives individuals more leverage, and now the individual just has like way more that they can do as a person and scale themselves in a way. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's what came to mind.
Yeah, I think once people get exposed to this sort of thing, and part of what we try to do is have like as many conversations as possible to inspire people to what's possible, and then to share people's stories. And that's what's so good about this Makerbot challenge. We're seeing people build out ideas with other people at the same time, getting like spurred on by other people pushing updates every single day, and actually just like putting some serious time and commitment into like building a product. And because they're doing it solo but in conjunction with other people, they're kind of like pulling things from elsewhere. So we're going to get like a landing page. Maybe my product wasn't going to have a landing page, but now I've learned how to do a landing page, so I'm going to put that on. Maybe we didn't really want an email list, but people are interested through Twitter and just going to like an email responder. That's like a bit of like automation work. Now we're going to like capture leads and put them into like an Airtable. So that's where this like the no code space is good, because you kind of start linking all this stuff together. So like naturally it kind of spreads through. More people get interested, like, oh, we should start a community. Let's add like Circle into the mix. So yeah, there's more and more tools kind of filling the gaps where the conversation like naturally goes when you're building a product. And this was something where previously you'd always have to get engineering time to do.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see, what's your prediction for trends as it develops into a community?
I can tell you like the vision. I don't think I've thought deep enough to like have a prediction, but I think of it as there's like a real time or a semi-real time layer. It can be Slack or similar, but we also have like a ritual or rituals where you can like constantly meet new members or reconnect with other members. And I'm a big fan of combining extremes. Like that's an extreme of community where you have like the super broad public, and then you also have the intimate. You can think about combining extremes in terms of investments. Some people go like super high risk, and then they have these super safe investments. And I can just like run off different permutations of that. But that's just how it manifests in community.
And what business models are the most interesting to you? So you're building your own business, whether it's meant to be like called a business or a project to start with, like it develops into that pretty quickly. What sort of models are you looking at or consider the most interesting?
To me,
Just to add to that, sorry, is it like a high growth startup with loads of people, or is it like a boring, steady business, which I know a lot of investors like? Not boring business, but boring business model, like steady growth
yeah.
and all that good stuff.
Are you asking personally or like objectively, like what's the best?
I don't think it's not what's the best, what's the most like interesting to you
To me,
as a
to
person.
me, what's most interesting to me is like a small, like two pizza team, super high leverage.
Got it. Leverage in which ways in particular?
In terms of the fact that it's small, we probably don't have time for like, like this is the best guy in terms of managing databases in the world. You need more switch hitters. But they're good enough, and then they can also write copy or some type of combination of that. You have to make up for that. You can't have the best of both worlds.
And what do you think are the two most high leverage skills in a person at the moment, considering how the remote nature of work's changed?
First to mind is like mindset, being high agency. That means that when something bad happens, you think about like, what could I have done to like change this, instead of always like seeking to put the blame on other people. I think that's table stakes.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is probably not waiting for permission, or understanding that you don't have to wait for permission. I understand those are like two, like not really tangible things, but if we talk about like hard skills, probably writing copy and code.
Yeah, copy is really interesting. And I think
Or
David Perel's
let me
done.
not say code. Let me say building, because I have a friend that I think that like he's kind of insecure that like he's not a developer, but he's super smart and he's a better builder than 90% of developers I know. Again, that's like where I come from, that world. And he can like outbuild any of them. But since he didn't take like a traditional path, or he's still like, couldn't maybe like add some JavaScript to a card site, like he'll solve the problem however he solves it. He's a better builder than most of them. So I think that like the ability to code matters less. Like building is a mindset, the ability to break problems apart and just persist through frustrations.
Got it. So now let's think about like new products. Let's say you weren't building trends and you were to approach like building a new product or business, like at the moment, in a different business model than trends. Let's pick the second most interesting business model, because obviously the one you're working on is the most interesting to you. What would you work on?
I have a few questions because I have to understand context. Like, how much time do I have? Like, do I have financial runway? Like, is it super urgent?
So this is, you have 6 months.
Okay.
And so it's urgent, but not super urgent. So you've got a bit of time, you've got a bit of runway. I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
I think that gave me, enough information, at least to take a first stab at it. So if I only have 6 months, I'm going to play it safe. Some people would be like, oh, that's a long time. I don't think that's a long time at all. So I would look at like what's already working, what's getting traction, but also like what's not a like winner take all or winner take most market. And then also something that I use that solve my pain, that like I see, improvements can be made. And then with 6 months, it also has to be something that can be built relatively quickly. Like there's a lot of constraints that you have to hit. But you're sort of like de-risked, like you've taken the market risk, because by definition, you're looking at something that already has traction. We could talk about like execution risk, the fact that like you don't have all the time in the world. So you're trying to like figure out what can be built like relatively quickly. That wipes a lot of stuff out. And as I think about it, like it's probably something around content, not saying that the way you're going to charge is to make it some type of like paid newsletter or paid report. But starting to like, I'm notorious, like sometimes it's like not a good thing. Sometimes it's to a fault, but I think super long-term. But if audience is that way, like you come up on that 4, 5, 6 month mark, maybe for whatever it takes for people to pay for content, maybe you take the sponsorship route or something else. That could be a way, right? And again, there's no education problem. Most people know how to read. You don't have to like, hey, like my tool is better than this tool because of X, Y, and Z. Fighting all of this friction. And it also positions you well in terms of optionality to look past the 6 month mark.
So do you see yourself as like a curator of knowledge? So would you stay the curation sort of route?
I don't see myself as a curator. A lot of people say that, and I just smile each time. And I think it'll become like more evident in like time, like why I'm not a curator, or why I don't see myself as a curator. Okay. But we can dive deeper there. We can like keep going. It's up to you.
No, let's do it.
Yeah. In terms of why I don't see myself as it, or what?
Yeah. So that it's clear that what you're doing is not as simple as just like pulling information like that come up on the same search and bringing them together. But I also think curation, I think the word curation is probably gets like a bad rap. And I think people use it to describe people who are just doing exactly that, just like let's just grab like the 10 links, let's pull them into a newsletter. That's not
And
what
I'm not one
doing.
of those people that thinks it carries a negative connotation, even when people say that, like, oh, like these are just curated newsletters. Like some of my favorite newsletters, Startup Resources,
Yeah.
Tools for Management, like they're curated newsletters, and they're some of my favorite things. So I don't,
Mhm.
yeah, I see what you're saying, but like when people say stuff like that, I'm the first to defend it, you know. But
Okay.
yeah.
So, okay. So what would you consider yourself as? Because I'm kind of pulling on this thread
Mm-hmm.
because not of not only for myself, but I know it's probably common for a lot of people in the community where, especially the Makerbot community, where they've probably joined Makerbot while they're doing something else. It could be a full-time job. It could be they've had a previous business and they start looking to figure out like what they're going to do next. It could be because they're just looking to build a product that's interesting to them and they want to build their first app. It could be they're just interested in the space. A lot of these people have like a separate identity and then almost get like a bit of like imposter syndrome when they start like building an app, and they won't consider themselves like a maker, a creator, an entrepreneur. So that you're kind of in this space where like, this is my identity that I had before I started doing this new thing, and now I'm doing this new thing. So I'm kind of in this void. So that's just why I'm curious.
Yeah, it's like a couple of things because like we don't even have to talk about like why I don't consider myself a curator, but just to focus on the identity piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like I don't know how to like hedge that away to like get rid of that friction. Like I made this transition from being a developer to being a founder, meaning that I talked to Cortland recently from Indie Hackers. And he was very interested in like, I saw this like smooth transition where you went from like building apps to like, doing a lot of content plays. And what I hope I made clear to him was that it was less about me consciously doing that and more about me consciously saying like, okay, I'm trying to wean myself from this developer identity onto this like founder identity, which means that no matter what the medium is, I'm just trying to solve problems. However
Mm-hmm.
I solve it, right? Like it can be an app,
Interesting.
it can be a tool, but I'm not wed to a medium. And I
Okay.
think like a lot of developers still get into trouble there where like, complexity is like cool to them, or, there's this elegant solution. Like people don't care about that. Like the market just doesn't care about that. So I think
Yeah.
that to go back to identity, I think that there's always going to be that like that friction, but it's just all like we talk about habit design now where like you can just keep showing up and eventually like the people around you are going to reflect back onto you like where you're going. You are a maker. You're proving it to yourself like each day that you show up. So I don't know if there's just like we can just snap our fingers and like that identity crisis or whatever you want to call it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to like prove it to yourself through behavior that you're actually changing.
Got it. And how's that changed over the course of the lifespan of trends to where it is now? Because I guess it wasn't exactly didn't look like that. It didn't look like the steady growth line upwards. It's more the roller coaster shape.
In terms of what identity, audience.
So a bit of everything. So
Mhm.
let's say you start a new product, you get like the excitement levels, you get the first users, you share stuff in public, some people sign up, and then like that fades away, and then like the hard work begins, and you go
Mhm.
down the trough, and then you begin like the longer, slower climb back up. So how was that for you?
Yeah, this is very much like a sample size of one, what I'm about to give, because I know that like it's not everybody's experience. But like everything, all the roller coasters, all the dips, like I experienced that in the first part of trends, like even before starting trends. So in a way, I feel like I front loaded that. And for me, it was just this way, like emotionally, it was this way up.
Okay.
Because I just had a list of ideas, and this was the idea that I did not know how I would monetize or how I would make money from it. But everything I tried up to that point, like back to back, I knew how I would make money from it. It just didn't shake out in terms of motivation. The roller coasters, like I got stuck in a dip and could never go up. So it was almost like a risk of, I know I love doing this work. I just don't know how I'm going to make it like feasible to like live off of it. And but I knew that like I could just keep doing it. Like I could keep showing up, I could keep doing it. So it wasn't like very much this for me. It's just like, it gets better and better and better. And people talk about like, oh, like a content treadmill, you're on a content treadmill. It's just like I just picked the right game because I understand what they're saying, but I don't feel that way, like it just feels like play to me.
Got it. And
Sample size of one.
just
That I'm not saying that's everybody's experience. I understand that. Yeah.
no, I think that's like a common thread I hear anyway, to do something that feels like play to you but works.
Mhm.
It feels like work to other people. So if you're in that space, then I think that naturally changes the grind a bit.
Yep.
Nice. In terms of trends, what trends would you like to see become popular that currently aren't?
I think a lot from like a bear's perspective of like, like, oh, I'm short subscription D2C, I'm short micro SaaS. But like what I'm gonna like let me give me a second. Um,
No worries. If you have any trends you want to ask Drew about, get them in the chat because I want to get his
the way I
opinion on
think
some
about
stuff.
it is like, what aren't people paying attention to? And I feel like, you know what? Like, I feel like that's what I tend to cover. Like, that's like almost my guiding question normally, unless I do like a micro SaaS or a subscription D2C. It's like, what aren't people paying attention to? I just think that's like my default question. Like, what matters that no one is like paying attention to?
Okay. And does it usually, I know it's heavily revolved around tech, but is there any like other like side interests of your own, maybe like personal interests that you either look for trends for now, or something you wish you could spend some time diving into?
No, like I
Some
don't
people
think
have like
like, I do have like,
trainers or running or
yeah, I do have like personal like interests that aren't involved in here, but I think that's the like beauty of I guess the expectations that I've set for trends that it doesn't always have to be in tech. I remember releasing the drop culture report, and sometimes this thing happens where like it ranges from like apathy to like absolute like love. Like that also happened with equity crowdfunding. Like it's so niche that like the people who love it, like that was the first report someone just like paid $50 for the report, and then otherwise it just seemed like more apathetic. That happened with drop culture, but you think of drop culture like everything has elements of tech. Again, it's a lattice work and I can draw connections between different things, but for the most
Mhm.
part I don't think that like most people in SF or wherever are thinking about drop culture. So I think that I would find some way to weave it in, but I also don't try to force it. Even within reports, the thing I talked about earlier with almost like no code spreading throughout the organization, I wanted to put that in this report on marketing funnels, but it just felt forced. So I was like, okay, I'll spin that out and then reuse that in terms of no code where it's more applicable. So I just think that like it just so happens that I get to like explore a lot of interests in doing this work. But I also just don't try to like force my personal interests into the work either.
Got it. So we've got a few minutes left. We've cruised through that hour. Um, what would your advice be for like early makers? So you're somebody who's built multiple projects. So it's not like you rolled into trends, built it for the first time and it's worked. You've transitioned career. You've always built and published products. You've talked about this for a while, but in your own communities, in the wider tech community, on Twitter, to kind of find where you are now. What would be your advice for people at the early stages of putting a product together? Or
Yeah,
service or business?
a few things. I just started writing down one, and then like two others came. I'll start from the end, right? So like I'll say find community, because I was in a position I'll say like 2019 for the most part where I had great friends but didn't feel like I could relate to them in terms of like business interests. And as soon
Mhm.
as I joined that mastermind 0 to 1 that I talked about earlier, like everything changed where each week we were pushing each other almost like ambiently, like right, like it's not we're playing a super long term game with each other. It's not like I want you to do bad. It's actually like, let me amplify everything that you're doing. And then we
Yeah.
also push each other in doing that. So that was a big part. Also, like finding something that I could do for a really, really long time. I say forever, but
Mm.
people like, they don't understand that. But to me, like it feels like forever. So what you enable is like this sense of compounding where it's just like, if that's the case, then, year three isn't going to look like year one. Year 20 isn't going to look like year three. In terms of like the impact that you have, and also like what you're learning internally, and what you're just everything, right? Like your the impact
Learning
that
by
the reach
osmosis,
that
or
you
just
have, yeah, the
like,
reach that you have, and also like the knowledge that you have. Everything is compounding if you pick something that you can work on for a while. And lastly, I'll just say like go audience first in terms of people. If you have those things and you're still not sure like how to get started, um, take what you think you can do for a while and then try to like build an audience around that. You don't have to know like what the product is going to be or what the business model is going to be like. If you serve a group of people, but you're also like in love with like SaaS business models, they'll have some
Mhm.
problem where that model fits that problem, or one-time products or whatever. Like we can always figure out like how to monetize like that attention, that trust, if you just, if you build that affinity. And also that's one of the only things that that is actually defensible these days.
Got it. So I presume that it'll be you're a fan of building and sharing in public. So what you're working on, this took me like a while to kind of figure out, even just you are working at Makerbot, just to sharing what you're working on does like such a good job of naturally connecting you with people who like passively consume your information. So let's say you have a Twitter account, like I think Twitter is probably the best for it. Just sharing what you're working on finds its way somehow naturally to people who are interested in like similar things to you. And by continuously doing that and just learning in public, sharing what you're building, sharing what you're working on without putting too much thought into like what am I writing here? Just make it feel as like natural as possible, and being inquisitive just forms that audience so quickly.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
think that's
magic.
like one way to go about it. I have a buddy KP that writes, I think it's buildingpublic.xyz is the
Mhm.
domain.
Yep.
But we had a conversation about the audience first products report. And what we realized, because like he was pushing the build in public angle, that's for some people, like that's not their style, but there's so many other ways that you can go about it. That's just like one strategy. So I think that like I see those two things as distinct. There's also a report on open startups where I talk about, building in public or, running things openly. Like it becomes a marketing play as well for, prospective customers, but also employees. You see this with Buffer after
Mhm.
they made their like salaries open, which I may be wrong, but I don't think they were like particularly like high salaries. But like the number of applications tripled like the next month that they received. So it's a play there.
There's an interesting one, just talking on that hiring topic to finish off, which I think is actually going to be a trend coming soon, because likely people will copy it. It's not, well, not a trend from you, whether you write about it or not. I don't know, maybe, is what Sahil is doing at Gumroad. So the last few hires that have come into Gumroad have been on the applicant's own terms. So this could be cold outreach. It could be just an email to Sahil saying, "Hey, this is who I am. This is what I can do. I'm really interested in working in Gumroad. I think I can offer X. I can work X hours a week. I'm fully remote, and this is the amount of money that I earn." And I think the last three hires have been obviously fully remote because Gumroad is fully remote,
Mm-hmm.
but non-standard hours. So they're just say 17 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 10 hours a week, been for a role that they weren't hiring for and that wasn't advertised and had been off of like a just a conversation.
Yeah, like up to this point, we've talked about like how to do the audience first approach with like building in public being one strategy. But what you just talked about is interesting because there are multiple ways to get there, and then there's multiple ways to use it, right? Like you could use it to find customers, you could use it to find your job. I linked to a couple people in that report who, if for some reason, like, GitHub or Microsoft laid them off, like there would probably be like a matter of hours before they had another job. Like it's that
Yeah.
crazy, like the reach and the influence that they had. But you also, and this happened before the whole rolling funds craze, I think like everything's coming together in the rolling fund. But a lot of these like angel investors or bootstrap, fund GPs, they have an audience. Tyler had an audience.
Mhm.
Rob Walling had an audience. And that's what's guiding a lot of this because like capital is agnostic. And then a lot of founders, they like to invest in, I'm sorry, a lot of investors like to invest in founders that are going to succeed anyways, right? So like,
Mhm.
not saying that they don't add value, but
Yeah, and also the other thing with that is the people who I've seen this happen with at Gumroad in particular are also working on their own projects. So they work for like a number of hours on their own project, their own business, and then they work for Gumroad like 10, 20 hours a week. But that's not working on Gumroad because they kind of like needed the job. It's because they're working at Gumroad because they're working on something that they chose to work on and is really exciting to them, and they probably do the best job at it because that's like the job they've chosen and are really interested in. So yeah, I just think that's really cool to watch. I don't know,
Yeah.
Sahil's kind of been at the front of that.
Yeah, I linked to that and blew it out in like the tweet thread as well. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we've just buzzed through an hour. I'm sure we can go on for much longer talking around many, many more trends and as they come about. So maybe we should kind of see if we can make this into a bit of a regular thing. But yeah, Dru, thanks ever so much for kind of giving up your time to speak to us. It's been good to kind of get your insights, and yeah, love what you're doing. If anybody wants to subscribe, I highly recommend you go to trends.vc and subscribe. Get not only the free report, but the pro report dives a load deeper, gives you some great insights into multiple applicable markets if you're talking about anything tech, entrepreneurship, makers, like spans so many different topics, or just if you're curious in how things are developing anyway. So yeah, hundreds of reasons to sign up.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for everybody who showed up. Appreciate it.
Also, Ramses has actually been taking notes through this entire conversation live in Rome. So if anybody wants to kind of view back any of the things that we've talked about, he has kindly made this available to us. So Ramses, thank you very much for doing that. That's incredible. And I'm going to look back through them now to see what he talks about. Dru, thanks very much. Thanks again. And I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
All right. Talk soon.
Thanks everyone for coming.